so happy. Thank you all are true theater stalwarts. We appreciate it more than we can tell you. I want to let you know that every chair was personally wiped down by us tonight before you came in. So, and it was filled with lots of good stuff that'll take off any germs and take off the paint as well. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming for this wonderful event as we celebrate the Muftis. And, you know, what the hell is a Mufti? Well, those of you who are our stalwarts know, but you're going to have great insights tonight. So please welcome first Eric Svejcar, one of our great music directors you've seen many times here. Erik Haagensen, who is one of our great musicologists who worked with us very closely on a number of shows, including Lolita last year. Simon Jones, noted actor who has the record for the most Muftis of any performers here. Pam Hunt, one of our great directors, who has directed, we'll talk about all these shows he's directed. Charles Wright, our wonderful biographer of the York. Stuart Ross, noted director, creator, and of course one of our wonderful folks who you've seen many times here, Stuart Ross, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, our brilliant artistic director, consciousness of the York, Jim Morgan.
Let me interrupt before,
Yes.
let me derail things immediately.
Absolutely.
Just 1 second. I want to share something with you all. You may have noticed that the lobby, the long wall in the lobby has been plastered, and you have no idea what it took to get it into the shape it's in now. The guys from the church have worked. They sanded it and scraped it and spackled it and resanded it for like 2 weeks to get it to the shape it's in. It's the best shape it's been in years. So that involved us taking down the board that we put the pictures on in the lobby. But just to show how much we are into recycling and preservation and what was the word? Frugality. Thank you very much. He's the word person. Repurposing. Thank you, Stuart. This was lying back to front in the green room the other day, and I noticed this. It says H to Merrily. This was a flat from Merrily We Roll Along in 1994. That just shows that we don't throw things away here. We repurpose them.
First season of this show, including directors.
No, second season.
Second season.
Yeah.
Including writers.
What?
Including writers.
What?
Writers.
We repurpose writers?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Anyway.
So, as you all know, and is there anybody here, I can't imagine, but be honest, is there anybody here who's never been to a Mufti at the York? Has there been anyone you've never been to? A couple of people have never been to a Mufti. All right. So, James, let's start off by giving your definition that you always give so brilliantly in terms of when people come here to see a Mufti, your definition of what that word is.
Well, the Muftis are a series of concert versions of shows from the past that deserve to be seen again and are in danger of not being done if people like us don't do them. We started them in 1994, the same year as Encores, totally unaware that Encores was starting. It is not the Encores. They are quick to say that, and we are quick to say it too. There are many pluses to both. But there's a totally different approach. Because of our smaller number of seats, we're able to do more esoteric shows. We can take chances on shows that they would never do because they have to sell 25,000 seats at every performance, and we don't have to. So there are things that we have done that they have done. You can judge which was better, which version was better. But anyway, our process has it's evolved over the years. The process is now a 2-week process. The rehearsal starts on Monday, rehearsing madly Monday through Friday. The dress rehearsal is Friday night. And then there are 2 previews now on Saturday, 1 preview Sunday afternoon, and it opens on Sunday night. Then the cast gets 2 days off. Wednesday afternoon, there's a brush-up rehearsal. Wednesday night, there's a performance on 2 performances on Thursday, and one on Friday night, 2 on Saturday, and it closes on Sunday afternoon for a total of 11 performances. And we've been doing that for
Since 1994.
well, but no, that schedule has been for the past 5 years. And we've done a total of 118 shows in the series. At number 100, actually number 98 is where we changed the format. It used to be a 5-performance run, all within 7 days, which was just crazy. And lots of wonderful things were done in that old schedule, because that is what we thought we had to deal with in terms of selling seats. We've happily found that there is an audience for doing many more performances. So next week it's going to a 3-week run. No, it's not.
So Charles, you and I were talking earlier, you know, the whole notion of doing concert versions of musicals actually really, in terms of especially musicals, I think really comes back to the 1980s where it started taking hold. But I will say, it's funny that with encores, with the Mufti, I remember we did one up at the Schubert Theater in New Haven and could not sell it, and because they said no one wants to come and see actors holding books with music stands. And there really was this pervading attitude. Talk a little bit about just the genesis of this whole notion and why.
Well, in the 80s, there were a number of concert programs, concert versions of operettas. New Amsterdam, what's the full name? The New Amsterdam
Theater
Company
yeah.
did shows like Rosemary and The New Moon,
Right.
and at Town Hall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Stuart
Yes.
worked with us. Yeah, Stuart did the very first one that we ever did. Yeah, exactly.
But the thing about encores in the Muftis is that they haven't focused on operetta. In fact, I went through the titles of the Muftis, and I found only 2 or 3 that could be described as operettas. There were 2 operas, Carmen Jones and Regina by Blitzstein, but the Muftis have focused on the book musical, and especially the book musical as it developed from the 30s forward. And you know, I don't think it's a surprise if you look at what was going on in the theater, and especially the New York theater in the 90s. The last sort of classic Broadway musical to premiere on Broadway and have a long run was 1983. Prior to that was 1983, and it was Le Cage aux Folles, a Jerry Herman show. By the late 80s, you had seasons where there were hardly any musicals on Broadway. 89, the awards shows, Tonys and Drama Desk, had so little to choose from that I think in 89, the Drama Desk only nomination was Jerome Robbins' Broadway. And so the Muftis appeared at a moment when the classic American musical was sort of in decline. And do you agree, Jim?
Yeah.
Jim, how did you all? I mean, what was the magic moment that you said, "Oh, we should start doing a series like this"?
Well, I didn't say it. Janet Walker said it, who was the founder of York.
Right.
We had a meeting at her house. Her husband, Charlie Walker, and me sat at their dining room table. And actually, B.T. McNichol had started a series here called Musicals in Concert, I think. And he did, does anyone remember what they were? He did one show here, and then he did one at the Mazer.
Was it connected with the York, or was it just?
No, they rented, it wasn't here. It was at the Mazer Theater on East 90th Street that Janet ran. And he did The Gay Life, and he did something else. And that was a year or so before. I think they didn't sell very well. I think people didn't quite get what was going on. And Janet saw this and said, I think there's something there. I think we should start a series of these shows that deserve that are in danger of being forgotten and that we find too expensive to do nowadays, but there's an audience for. And so we sat at the table, talked about how it could be done very simply, and Charlie is the one who came up with the name because he was in the Navy, and the word Mufti spoke to him. I don't know what other ones we suggested, but out of that evening's meeting, we came up with the title Musicals in Mufti, which I think we've done more to make that word known than anyone in the world. And there's still people who have no idea what it means, and people who think we should change the name of the series, but I think it is what it is at this point.
It is a
That's
great.
yeah.
How did you all come up with that first season?
It reminded me what it was. It was the Grass Harp and
A Doll's Life,
And Oh Brother.
and Oh Brother.
right. The Grass Harp was a real favorite of Janet's and mine. We had done the first revival of it. Molly was very much involved with it. Molly's the secretary of our board and one of the founders of the company and longtime stage manager and all sorts of things. And the show was not successful on Broadway, and we did the first revival of it, which was very successful. It really got us our name out there, and we both looked at each other and said, we think the Grass Harp, right? And we agreed. Oh Brother, I forget what the connection to that was. Michael Valenti,
But that was the first time it had been done since it.
I believe so, yeah.
Because
yeah.
it only I don't know who Eric whoever, because Oh Brother was like 1980s, right? I mean, it hadn't been.
Yeah,
Same
it
year
was
as
the-
Merrily.
Oh, okay, so it hadn't been
Yeah.
that long away. So
I'm sorry, I'm gonna derail things
Yeah.
again.
okay.
I'm just worried that there are. I would love for everyone up here to just tell what they have done in the Muftis, what shows they've been involved with, or not everyone, but just a few titles, just to give us a little background before we all start spouting off, or now that I've spouted off. Stuart, would you talk?
Yes, I did. I think my first one was It's a Bird That's Playing at Superman and Bonjour, then Enter Laughing twice, and then
Which we would definitely want to talk about the whole
Yeah.
renaissance of that tonight later
that
on.
was great. And Minnie's Boys, Silk Stockings, Subways Are for Sleeping.
And when we started the New to New York series, which is similar to the Muftis, except it's new shows, you did the first show in that series, which was?
Compose Yourself.
Yeah, we were doing a series of Larry Grossman shows.
We put
and
that together.
a review of Larry Grossman's songs. And
That was wonderful.
Charles?
I write the program notes for Muftis, and my first was Darling of the Day.
The first one.
The first one in the fall of 1998. So about 100 program notes so far.
Wow.
He also happens to be the co-president of the Drama Desk, but we won't talk about it.
Okay, I made a little list.
Oh, well.
I've done 6. I've done Destry Rides Again, Tom Lehrer's Tomfoolery, The Show Goes On, which was a Tom and Jones. You'd have done a production, but we did it in a Mufti with 2 other of his shows. Berlin to Broadway with by Kurt Weill, Jerry's Girls, and The Decline and Fall, which I did this last of the entire world, The Scene Through the Eyes of Cole Porter.
So what did I do? This is going to be well. Darling of the Day accounts for 2 because we did 2 productions of that, didn't we? Separated by a year or 2.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was more than that.
It was quite
It
long.
was 5 or 6.
1998 and 2005.
So, tumultuous public demand. Let's finally bring it back all that time later. Green Willow, Sherlock Holmes. I directed Pacific 1860 and was in it. What else? The Girl Who Came to Supper.
Did you hear that? He directed.
Oh, God, I'll speak out loud at it. Sorry.
You're an actor.
You're a film actor. You're a film actor.
Yes, that's right. No, I've been corrupted then.
What does that mean?
No, that's not me, thank goodness. All right, well, I'll go over it again. Darling of the Day twice.
What was the timer?
Green Willow, Sherlock Holmes, The Girl Who Came to Supper, Pacific 1860. What else have we got now?
Well, here, you can look at the whole
Yes,
list.
I mean, and quite a few.
Baker Street.
Was it 9? Baker Street, that was it. That wasn't called Sherlock Holmes. Baker Street, which was great fun to do.
And you directed and were in.
Seth, which one?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, yes indeed, yes.
And then this year you did Panama Hattie.
And Panama Hattie.
Right.
I mean, it sounds terribly blasé to have forgotten how many I did. But
No, that's fine.
Now,
I did a whole 9.
but
out of
what did you
118.
direct? You directed and were in.
At the Pacific 1860, and
And Oh Boy.
and Oh Boy, yes,
Yeah.
with Barry Dudardé, as I call him,
Yes. Yes.
all the live long. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Eric.
Well, I've been involved in helping to find materials for several things, including The Girl Who Came to Supper and Day Before Spring. But the two main ones that I really worked on as a writer were Darling of the Day and Lolita, My Love. Darling of the Day was an actual job of rewriting. The estates all wanted it rewritten because none of the authors had been happy with it on Broadway, and indeed had done some rewrites after Broadway in hopes of getting a London production. And so on that one, I actually wrote new material, both book and lyrics, in an attempt to solve the problems of the show, which I think we did, but you know. On Lolita, My Love, that was an entirely different thing. I took a credit called Edited By. That show had gone through many, many changes and had closed out of town in Boston and never made it to Broadway. At the Library of Congress in the Alan J. Lerner archive, Lerner wrote the book and lyrics, John Barry the music. There was tons of material on that particular show. And there were also 2 scripts that had been written after the show closed in Boston, because the plan had been to bring a new production to Broadway, and Mike Nichols had agreed to direct it. But that fell apart because John Barry quit. But they had done a fair amount of work since the closing in Boston, and there were 2 scripts that had material that no one had ever seen and had never been on a stage. And I took 6 basic different scripts and edited together what we did here.
And I do, because I'm going to jump ahead because I want to get back to that specifically and our whole experience with Lolita last year in more detail in a second. So yeah, because it's fascinating, even the surrounding area of getting it on here.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So, Eric.
I've done 4. Feels like I've done a lot more. But I also did the Mufti 100 concert, which, as we
Which was
said,
like-
was the equivalent of about 6.
That too,
But I did Big, and then I did the 3 entirely music songwriter shows with Pam. We did
Yeah.
Jerry's Girls, Decline and Fall, Cole Porter, and Berlin to Broadway with Profile.
So to Stuart and Pam and Eric, and Simon, we'll get to you in a second, but to you 3 as directors in various forms, what is the greatest challenge? What has been of doing a Mufti in the circumstances? You all know what it is only too well. Separate from Interlaughing, because I do want to keep Interlaughing in a separate category right now. But other in general, what do you find are some of the greatest challenges?
I just love it. I have no challenge. I mean, it's just a celebration. It's, I mean, there are many casting is always a bitch. I mean, it's just impossible, and it's last minute, and you're adjusting to everybody's schedule, but that can happen anywhere unless you have a huge budget, and most of us don't work in huge budgets, and so you're working with, always, even, on a regional level, wherever. It's being able to work on your feet and being able to make the changes and celebrate the form. And that's the big thing, not making excuses for it, just being with music stands. Keep those scripts in hand. Don't let the actors look away from the scripts and have fun. We can't change we certainly can change the show, but we're not responsible
Right.
for making a whole new show, but we are responsible for having fun with what we have and transporting the audience into that fun world, because no writers set out to write a show that wasn't successful. They had some and you try to find that germ and move on, and I just love it. So challenges, bring them on.
Well, that's, and Pam, I mean, first, Pam, you're one of the geniuses of the musical moving music stands. So,
Yes.
No, actually, that was Stuart.
Stuart invented it.
Stuart,
but
did you, Stuart, you invented
Yeah,
the musical
Stuart,
moving?
yes,
Yeah.
one of the hallmarks.
And-
Of the,
Yeah, well, talk about how that came about then.
Well, it was doing the Minnie's Boys, and I wanted to have some way
which
for
is a story of the
the
Marx,
Marx
Brothers.
Brothers, and I wanted to have some way to keep them always moving, the Marx Brothers, and not have them leave the script. So Chris, I think it was Chris, or
Scott.
Chris.
I think it may have been Scott. Anyway,
Well,
one of
anyway,
our
just
wonderful
lighting
production
people.
managers.
And we like figured out, we put, made a little platform, but, and on the overture, I had them all like throw the music stands, on wheels out, and they ran into each other and created this chaotic mess, and all the women who were in the cast came out and straightened them, and the Marx Brothers came out during the overture and switched all the scripts around. So none of the, and then they sing the opening number about horrible, the pain of having 5 growing boys,
Speaking of which, one thing that I think a lot of people may not be clear of is our equity rules about the Muftis. When you all come see a Mufti here and you see people with music stands and with the scripts in hand, it is oftentimes, now it's changed a little bit in the last 2 years, but up until about 2 years ago, if you did a Mufti here, it was a rule by Actors Equity that you had to have the script, if not in hand, literally at hand. And we were cited several times by equity representatives who would come and see a show saying, no, you see, they did not have the script in hand. So even if the actor may have wanted to learn the and by the time they're done, basically know the show, there was a very strong ruling by equity that they still had to have it in hand, which is also why the moving music stands came in very handy, because then at least it gave them some flexibility. But this was a very, very specific rule, and I remember even since I've been here, there was one night when our former representative, the young lady from Equity, came and said, yes, she said that was really terrific, but they're moving too much and their scripts are away from them. So one of the things that we've worked on the last couple of years, and if you're a true Mufti person, you'll notice that it's become much more flexible. That with our more recent rulings, people can actually do a number without actually holding the script. But the rule is still, the script has to be somewhere on the stage. And
So you may find a music stand over in the corner, or we have done scenes where someone else is holding the script for the person who's singing over here. They are becoming a virtual music stand. Now, some directors don't use the music stands at all. They find Michael Montel, for example. Incidentally, Michael Montel, the Mufti master, who has directed 22 or 23 of these, was not comfortable coming out in this current flu emergency situation. So sends his regrets, and we send ours back. But anyway, he really doesn't like staging things at music stands. He really likes staging them as a show would be staged, and so people are walking around with music stands, with scripts. Sorry.
Yes, there's something slightly odd, if I may interrupt.
Yeah, please.
Over at the other place at City Centre, the series we've already referred to, but we won't need to again. Insofar as the rules there are, yes, you can carry a script if you must or want to. You are not forbidden to carry a script. And so you are immediately shamed into having to learn everything. And that is why you won't see the scripts very often there. But there is probably one hidden away, rather like F. Murray Abraham's Oscar,
But
somewhere on the set.
They have a longer rehearsal period. In
Well,
their, to
marginally.
their
It's
credit.
not much.
Really?
And they're so ambitious.
What?
And they're so ambitious. The choreography
They're very
is simply
ambitious.
staggering.
They're,
I
yes.
like this
Yeah.
script.
Anyway,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so just so some of you may not realize that there are very real parameters that we have to work within, that is set forth by the actors union that we work with it, but that have also thankfully loosened up, and you see, and you're also only allowed 3 choreographed numbers.
It's new,
And
and that's new.
that is
yes,
new.
right. where so that and there's become a big discussion. And Pam, this is something you can talk.
Yeah.
Is the difference between musical staging
Yeah.
and choreography?
Well, to me, musical stage, sometimes it blends, it's hard to tell what's what. But to me, a choreography is you don't have anything in your hand and you dance, basically. That's, to me, what a piece of choreography is. Shall I talk about it?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Speaking of the music stands, I've used all different, I think now what I've used the rolling, we use stationary, sometimes we have it in our hands. It depends on, to me, what the number or what it's going to be. Because sometimes I find if you have it in your hand, you're looking down. And if it's in a stand, if you're doing a ballad or something, the music is there. And in a couple of days, they get so they can use their hands, they can do. Because I've done a lot of reviews here, which the Torturous Review, which I love to do. Away from here, I've done gigantic shows. You've been in one of them. But there's something about these things, like I had done Berlin to Broadway. I had actually done a production of that before. And so when this came up, it was so much fun to get in there and do it and get again, it's the cast. Especially the smaller the show is, it really, if you make a mistake in casting, well, I think anyway, you spend all the time making up for it. So it's that, and it is like working, Eric and I have worked so much, it's working with the music and how's it going to be, like, for instance, Decline and Fall had not been done since it was done in the 60s. And Kay Ballard was a mentor of mine. I worked for her, and I knew how she did one of the songs, so it was very exciting for me to direct Lauren Molina to do The Tale of the Oyster in the manner that Kay did it. I knew I had enough info about it, but a lot of that we had to just, oh my God.
Yeah.
There were things that were so politically incorrect that we just went, oh my God, gotta go, bye, gotta go, just terrible, misogynistic, and just you name it. So that's been kind of the thing. I've really enjoyed working with different people, and we've had a ball, and it is the cast. I think you really want to get that great cast that can handle a lot and can handle a lot quickly and can read, because there's been problems too if you get somebody who doesn't read music terribly well.
Yeah, John McMartin always turned me down when I asked
Yeah.
him to do something. He said, I would love to, but I can't read music. It would take me forever
true.
to learn this, far longer than a week.
Yeah.
And it just wouldn't be fair to me or to your audiences. And then there are other people who don't like working that quickly.
Yeah.
Sandy Duncan, I directed The Grass Harp the second time we did it, and Sandy Duncan was in it
Yeah.
and played the second sister and was absolutely brilliant. She made that part into something it has never been before.
Wow.
And afterwards, when it was over, she said, "Don't ever ask me to do one of these things. I don't like working that quickly." And,
It is.
Eric, what about you in terms of especially dealing with especially since so much of the emphasis is on, as much the score and Eric, if you have never heard Eric is one of the great masters of the piano. I mean, he is there is nothing that Eric can't play, and when he plays it, you close your eyes and you hear the score as if it was a full orchestra. It's really rather extraordinary. So talk about that whole experience.
Well, I mean, I think that's important for this because we are trying to, walk that line between being representational and actually being what it is. And so I think and the scores are what people are coming to hear. For me, even before I worked on Muftis, I came to see a number of them just because things that I knew from recordings. This was a way to just fill in, just to get to know a show like Henry Sweet Henry. I remember was the first one I saw, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, now I know what this show is, and I don't need to go see it. No one needs to spend $1 million putting a full production on stage. Like, we sort of get the point. But yeah,
if anyone's interested, we're not.
Yes. But as you say, learning the music, especially since Pam and I have now done 3 of these that are entirely music, which normally they're books and there's scripts, so that takes a little bit of the pressure off. So I feel like we've had this unique thing of where we just have no time at all. We just have to jump in and
We make
start
choices
immediately,
and who's going to do what, and it's fun.
You can. The secret is I do work with singers ahead of time. You're not supposed to. Again, like Equity is very clear about but
You do what?
No, if they ask.
Right.
If they
There's
ask.
no problem if they ask.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's always the that's how we've always.
Yeah, it's fine if they ask.
That's true.
You
Yeah, we
cannot
have-
force them
yeah, we
to
cannot
even look
force
at the
them
script
to.
ahead
Right.
of time.
But
But
every
most
sing-
people say, please, can I have the
Yes.
script?
Every single
They
time I've
want to
said-
get to know it.
Yes, or just even recording things for people ahead of time, just so that they have the, you know, I do a lot of record the piano parts and then just email them to everybody, so that the first day of rehearsal we're not necessarily maybe learning everything from scratch. And so, I mean, that just kind of becomes, you just really don't have time to think. You just kind of have to do it. You don't have a lot of time to make second choices. You kind of have to choose your, you know, go with your instincts and go. Sometimes stuff can get adjusted in the second week, but I feel like I always remember that the first 4 shows, I always feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I turn the pages, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to see on the next page. And then finally, by like the second weekend, I sort of feel like, oh, okay, now I feel like I know the show. Now I can actually make some choices and, you know, try and be musical as opposed to just guessing. But at the same time, I think a lot of wonderful things happen when you just sort of toss it at the wall and sort of, you know, relieve the pressure of, we don't have time to make this perfect. We just have to make it interesting. We have to make it exciting. You know, I think that kills things too, is trying to make them too precise and too perfect. You need to get the kind of actor who's, you know, doesn't mind if they're going to hit a wrong note here and there if they're going to give a great performance, because I think that's
And
the
happily, I think our audience is with that. They are
Yes.
not, people who've never worked here before, who are doing a Mufti for the first time, actors,
Yeah.
say, what, but I'm scared, I don't really know this material.
Mhm.
We say, you couldn't possibly know this material.
Yeah.
That's why you have a script in front of you, and the audience is with you. They want these shows to work. They believe in them. They may know them only from the cast recording. They may know it from having seen it on Broadway 50 years ago, but they believe in the show, and their belief will help you make it happen. I have to just jump off something else you said, sorry. You were talking about doing reviews, and Charles said to me, we went to see a show together last night, and he said, I noticed looking down the list you've done a number of reviews. And I said, well, I happen to like reviews, but also we have found that they're less expensive. They're generally 3 or 4 people, or if you choose the right ones. And they're a wonderful palate cleanser between 2 big, overblown things on either side of them. So we've done a lot of them. That's one of the things we, the people across town, never did them until we started doing. The other thing that we led the way with was doing shows from off-Broadway. People were not doing off-Broadway shows. And we have done a lot of those, and they've started a whole series doing off-Broadway shows. But I'm glad they were
New York
inspired.
could lead the way.
Anyway.
So Simon, talk about the very first. What was your first Mufti? Did you?
Darling of the Day.
What Darling of the Day?
It was
the
Darling
first?
of the Day. Oh, yeah. Well, yes. Well, the first dress rehearsal is spent most of the time with your script in your hand, searching for some light somewhere behind to know when it's your next turn to come on, because you really aren't altogether sure how the scene progresses and how the show rolls out. And the main thing, of course, at the end is to try not to get too confident, and look away from the script, because I've seen that happen with people who haven't done it as often as I have. Go hopelessly off the rails because they look up thinking they know the tune and the words, and they don't. So they have to go back. Yes, it's like being shot out of a cannon, but you're out there.
Yeah.
I did have a lot of practice because for 25 years I was with a company called Tact, which did plays, and we did them with script in hand. And we rehearsed them much as we did Muftis, mainly facing up front so that people could choose the expressions, the close-ups that they particularly wanted. It was a method invented by Scott Allen Evans, which was very effective. Because readings where people have their heads in their books and are facing each other, pretending to have dialogue, are a nightmare to the audience because they don't actually see what's going on. It may be that we get a bit presentational, but it was terribly good practice. I now know how to hold one of those black files in one hand, so I can flip the page over and even have a prop. And that was hugely helpful. And you do discover a different kind of presentational way of going out to the audience. And though you couldn't hear me earlier, I think you can now. I hope so. I got out of the habit. But there is a technique, but you get it. I suppose. I mean, I feel rather sorry for people who do it for the first time because it is.
Yeah,
It is a sort of nightmare. You think. Do you remember The Actor's Nightmare by
Yeah,
the
right.
playwright?
Yeah.
Where he finds
Chris Durang.
Chris Durang. where he finds himself in a play he doesn't know about. We have these dreams. Play you don't know about, you know it's your cue and you can't find your way to the stage, you don't know what it's about, and you've probably got no clothes on. Yes. And that's the sort of sensation of doing your first Mufti.
I have a story. I don't know if you'll remember this, Simon, but on Darling of the Day, the first time I was...
Would you, we all talk, we know these shows. Everyone may not. Would you just say who wrote Darling of the Day?
Darling of the Day has a book by Nunnally Johnson, lyrics by E.Y. Harburg, music by Julie Stein. It is based on a novel and play by Arnold Bennett called Buried Alive at one point.
And it was rather unsuccessful.
And was unsuccessful on Broadway, yes. Although Patricia Rutledge, who played the lead, did win the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical. But, you know, we were all new to the process. It was Michael Montel's first Mufti. And there is a scene in Darling of the Day in the first act, a song called Let's See What Happens, where the young widow is trying to romance our leading man. They have corresponded but never met, and she wants to marry him. And it's a wonderful, wonderful scene. And as part of the scene, she turns on a music box in her parlor, and they waltz in the parlor. And Michael felt that it was really crucial to the scene. And Michael really wanted to actually have them waltzing, even though the rule was, you know, no choreography. But this was actually happening in the scene, so whatever. And Michael was working with you and with Nancy Opal, who was playing the lead, and nothing was coming together. And Nancy suddenly just went, "Michael, there isn't time." And suddenly we didn't waltz.
Well, speaking of that, this is for everybody, because you all have done. When you're doing the Muftis, and you're working with actually one of the creatives, one of the original creators of a writer, something like that. I think every one of you all have. How does that fit into, you know, you're still working within this environment, you only have 5 days, and by the way, here's, well, not Julie Stein, but, you know, here is someone, you know, who is Joe Stein, or someone like that. How do you make that work and say, but this is how much time we have, and I know you want to do this? Talk a little bit some of those experiences. Anybody, everybody.
It was Joe Stein. If he wanted something, I found the time. I figured it out.
Well, let's talk. I mean, for right now. Let's go right to Interlaughing, because how that even came about. Jim, why don't you talk about how it came to New York?
Well, we're doing a series of Joe Stein things. We had done a series the year before of 4 of his, and someone will have to tell me what they were. But anyway, so I decided either a year later or 2 years later to do another Joe Stein series. And I was talking with Joe, who had become a great friend, and said, what should we do? And he said, well, there's this. He said, and there's So Long 174th Street. I don't know if it works, but you're welcome to try it. So I read it. I thought this has possibilities, but it needs a really good director of comedy. I thought of Stuart. I introduced Stuart and Joe. They hit it off. And they had like 2 weeks before we did it in the Muftis to rewrite the script, and it became Interlaughing the musical from So Long 174th Street, which had been very unsuccessful on Broadway however many years before. And there were people who actually warned me about doing it. Don't do that show, it does not work. And it just shows when you get the right director, the right cast, the right everyone, and do it simply and trust the material. And having Joe around didn't hurt at all, because Joe and Stuart worked on the book and and they even tweaked some lyrics and used songs in different ways. You can tell what you
Yeah,
did.
Stuart,
Anyway,
well,
that's
Stuart,
how it happened.
So talk about first how it went from 174th, So Long 174th Street to actually the title Interlaughing.
That I think happened before I came on board.
Yes, Joe just, we were talking about doing it, and I don't know where it was in the process, but at some point he said, you know, one of the biggest mistakes we made was calling it So Long 174th Street. We had a successful novel, Interlaughing.
Which was called
We had a
Interlaughing,
successful
right?
movie, a play, Interlaughing, that he had written, a successful movie called Interlaughing, and for some reason we called the musical So Long 174th Street. And not only did people not know what it was, but they couldn't remember the title. They would say, I'm going to see this show tonight called So Long Some Street. And he said, so the first thing I want to do is change it to Enter Laughing, the musical. So that was a beginning right there to turning it around.
Yeah. When I read it, I hated it. I didn't like it at all, but I remembered the movie when I was a kid. My older brother took me to the movie, and I laughed so hard at Elaine May and Renee Santoni in the dressing room scene. I'd never seen anything that funny. And I didn't like slapstick. I never did. But and when I saw this, it was amazing. And I remembered that, and I asked Joe, could we put the play back in it and make the songs work around the play instead of trying to do it the other way around? And he said, well, like what? And I said, why is the opening number like this? And we gave it a context of we both came up with making him deliver a sewing machine into the theater, so the opening number made sense. So we just tried to track everything and just take everything that didn't work and put it on the back burner, and everything that did work, we just expanded. And then I came up with some funny ideas, and he came up with some amazing new scenes, and we both wrote together, which was one of the joys and honors of my life. He became a very dear friend in a very short period of time. We were very close. And, and the laughing happened.
Well, but talk about that, the first time that you did it, because the first time was a Mufti, right?
Well, we were lucky we had Josh Grizzetti, the brilliant, and we had Josh Grizzetti and Jill Eikenberry and Michael Tucker and Ray DeMattis and George Irving. And George had done it originally, so I got a lot of credit for just like how well it was done. It was really the cast that if we didn't have George Irving, he came in, he knew everything. So I just could get out of his way. And Josh Grizzetti had a natural ability as if he were born to the Second City in improv in the 60s. He just knew how to work with this stuff and make it so natural. And that's where I lived, and that's what I loved. And we were able to do things he was so real and so funny. And Jill and Michael are consummate actors. And so, again, it was the casting. It was just a magical kind of...
And Josh was the right age, more or less.
Yes, he was 25, yeah.
That was one of the big problems with the original.
Alan Arkin was way...
Not Alan Arkin, he was in the play, but...
Robert
Morris.
Robert Morris.
Robert Morris.
Robert Morris.
Yeah.
That was a big
was
problem.
in his 40s.
Yes.
Playing a 17-year-old.
45 or 46, yeah.
And what happened between doing it here as the Mufti, and then how much later did you do it as a Mufti again? Or
Yes,
then,
we did 2 Muftis, and
about a couple of months apart, I think. It was so successful, we brought it back
as a second
Mufti.
Mufti.
And then we knew we wanted to try and make it a full production.
Between those 2 Muftis, I rewrote Ha Cha Cha to be a duet, because we were going to cut it. Joe wanted it cut, because it wasn't working in where it was in the show, and it was a solo, which made no sense. So we made it a duet, and the father then had an arc in Act 2, and it separated the 2 big comedy. It added a comedy number, but it separated the 2 big. It gave the break to the kid. And
actually, the second Mufti time we did it, George was not available. He was in the hospital.
yeah,
and
because he
Richard-
fell while
he
we were
fell.
doing it. That was a horrible story.
He was at our gala,
At a gala,
where we
the
honored
Joe.
Joe Stein,
And
and
he-
George fell up in the
Off the
church.
stage.
And so he was in the hospital, and Richard Kind, wasn't it Richard Kind?
Didn't
did
Bob
it?
Dishy do it as well?
Then
No, that was later on.
That was later.
Then we brought it back. We brought it back as a full production for 8 weeks, a year and a half later, a year later, something, and very successful. Then we had to do another show, so we closed it down and reopened it for another 8-week run. But George said, "I'm too old. I can't do this again." I think he was 85, maybe. I don't know. He said, "I'm whatever age, and I cannot travel across town every night to do this. So you're going to have to get someone else." And also, what's her name was not available. Anyway, so Bob Dishy came in then, and Marla Schaffel came in, and it was equally successful for another 8-week run. So, and that's all because of the Muftis, and that's where I got courage to. I'd always said the main stage series is all new shows or new to New York or something, And after that, I realized there's value in taking shows that might as well be new because they're so unknown. And if we help bring them back to life, they should be part of the main stage series too. So that helped reshape our main stage series in a big way.
I think that you should tell everybody, make sure everybody knows what the showstopper was that Mr. Irving sang 8 nights a week.
The Butler song.
The Butler
He
song.
also sang it at the 100th concert, didn't
Yes.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah, yeah,
called,
Killed with
the
it.
title is the Butler's song, but
He's screwing Dolores Del Rio.
That's wonderful.
So we had a problem by the time when we came back and did it again this year. I'm going, how are they going to, I didn't know those people, a lot of them, even the first time, but so we put a glossary in the program.
And also, you were very smart. You worked names into the script throughout.
Yes.
People referred to
Right.
Dolores Del
Oh.
Rio,
Yeah.
to so-and-so, to so-and-so. So it wasn't like
Everybody.
hearing them for the first
They
time.
kept
But you at
talking
least
about,
had
the kids kept talking about all these people that
they wish
meet.
they were.
They wish
or-
they were. So I got in over half of them. I got like,
And so
13 out
it
of
wasn't
17.
out of the blue. There was
and we
this
had the
feeling.
pictures outside in the lobby with David Kolowitz with Dolores Del Rio in the real poster, beautifully photoshopped in Caliente, starring David Kolowitz and Dolores Del Rio, or David Kolowitz as King Kong with Fay Ray. So the names, we had one for every name in the song out in the lobby. So at least it looked like, they were big stars. Even if you didn't know them, we knew that there was some ideal, impossible dream he was going after. It
So-
actually worked to our advantage.
Now, when you look at these shows and you look at, again, taking a process and then they become something else or they go on to other things, or you have a different look at them, and this is where I want to go from that to probably one of the more controversial Muftis, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, which is Lolita. Certainly in terms of the putting it together and then the process that we went through with doing Lolita, because I don't know how many people saw Lolita, but it was great. I mean, it was I think a wonderful success due to all this wonderful work. Jim, first talk about when you first started talking about doing Lolita and the different reactions we got with looking at the script that first time.
Well, it was Eric's idea, Eric being the learner scholar. We were doing a series of learner things. He said, this would be very out there, but it's worth doing. And I had known it from a recording for years, but hearing it and then hearing his proposal about how to integrate these 6 scripts got me very excited. And it was scary, though, because particularly in today's climate, the Me Too movement, the whole idea of telling the story of Lolita as a musical sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit. And but then you read the material, read what Eric created with Lerner's material, and it was brilliant. But I was terrified. We were all scared, but I was sort of the one who was saying, we should do this, we should do this.
And say a couple of the reactions you had.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Two very good friends who, one who had seen it in Boston, one it's Peter Felicia and Josh Ellis. One had seen it in Boston, one had seen it in Philadelphia, and they said, do not do this show. It will close your theater. You have no idea how much people will hate it. You'll be picketed. You will have things thrown at you. You cannot do it today. And I didn't realize how different Eric's adaptation was at that point. I don't know if I hadn't.
I'd given you both, and I told you should read both of them, but you'd only read mine.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So then I thought I sent it to, and then I sent it to a number of people, but particularly women. But people that I trusted, I wanted their opinions, and no one said, "Do not do it."
Well, tell them
Jacqueline Parker, I sent it to you,
And Elisa Stein.
and Elisa
who
Stein.
came back
Elisa Stein read both. She said, "I read the adaptation and I was fascinated. I started it. I felt uncomfortable. Should I be reading this?" And she said, "I just got into it and I was completely taken with it. I couldn't stop reading." And And then I thought, well, I really should read the other one. And she said, I read 5 pages of it and I felt dirty and I couldn't finish it. She said, I think you should do this. I think it's important. Jacqueline, you said, don't be afraid of people picketing your theater. That's what you want. It'll get you all the attention. It'll sell you
No,
tickets.
but I also think that we've become accustomed to things being censored along the way, and it's too much for people's delicate sensibilities, blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about Alan J. Lerner here. We're talking about a terrific book,
Right.
correct? And these things need to be looked at and make your own judgments, whatever you may think, but they were not written to offend. They reflect a certain reality of life. You don't like that reality, just bury your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. But I think these things need to be addressed.
And that also goes back to the basic idea of doing the Muftis. It allows people to see things and make their own judgments. No one is looking to make a big commercial production. So, Eric.
Well, wait, let me just finish one thing about Eric and I talked from the beginning about a female director for it to add a context which was not there originally, and which made a statement about how we were trying to handle this delicate material, this difficult material, and we ended up with Emily Maltby, who did a beautiful job, really
Sensitive.
thoughtful and sensitive and intelligent handling of this difficult material. So I'm very proud of what was accomplished in that production.
So-
Yes, it probably was the most difficult.
Well, there are other
Subject
issues
matter.
that because it just gives insight in terms of how to put these things together, what you have to go through, that there's no reason that any audience member should know, but which is actually fascinating, which is the rights, which but let's start from the beginning. Let's start when you were not the very beginning, but when you were first talking about doing it, and we were trying to get in touch with Mrs. Barry.
The widow of the composer.
Yeah, John Barry's wife, John Barry, who wrote Out of Africa and the James Bond movie theme, so it's a
Dances
very
with
famous film.
Wolves and-
Yeah,
Well, we were having trouble finding her.
right.
Now, she lived out on Long Island, actually quite near where Alan J. Lerner had a house in Oyster Bay. John Barry had bought his house out there because he fell in love with it when he was working on the show with Lerner out there. But we had terrible time. I reached out to Don Black in the UK, who wrote a lot of, is actually John Barry's probably primary lyricist in his career. We knew somebody, Julie Stein's widow knew Don Black. So through her, we reached out to Don Black to have him vouch for us to Mrs. Barry. And he agreed to do it, but he never had to do it. So it was wild tracking her down. We did not know for sure whether Alan J. Lerner estate still owned the rights to the stage musical rights or not. There had been a subsequent play done on Broadway, adapted from the novel by Everett Albee. And the Lerner estate thought that they did.
Right.
So we went ahead, and we didn't hear anything. I mean, they started announcing.
Well, this was the thing that I'm just going to put it. We had gotten our assurances in writing from Mrs. Barry, who we did find,
Right.
who turned out to be a very lovely lady who lives in that. I have to say that when we sent her flowers, we got the address, and I pulled it up on Google Maps, and all I saw were all these trees and all this, I said to our company manager at the time, I said, that looks like a forest or something, the park. And we looked like, oh no, that's her house. So James Bond did very well for them. But anyway, so we got the approval from Mrs. Barry. We got the approval from the Lerner estate.
Yeah.
And we thought we were just fine. This is where there is a level of you never know how many layers you peel back on an onion skin. Because then, literally, the week before we were supposed to start.
Well, no, the week of rehearsals.
Yes.
There was an article in the New York Times
Right.
interviewing Emily and our wonderful lead, Caitlin Cohen, and me as well. And it was a full-page article in the Times with a big picture of Emily and Caitlin. And suddenly the phone rang.
And I got a phone call from the representative at, is it William Morris? William Morris, whatever William Morris is called these days. But
WME.
How was it?
WME.
Yeah. And they said, how do you have the rights to this show? And I said, well, we have the rights from the Lerner estate. We have the rights from the Berry estate to do this production. Well, no, you don't have the rights because Edward Albee owns the rights to this. And, I said, well, I forget the guy's name. I said, well, look, there's certainly no intent of, whatever here. We're not trying to mount a commercial production. We're just mounting this Mufti series. It'll be done. And, he knew perfectly well about the York. He knew about the Muftis. Well, we need to have a phone call. So, and he was being very, very strong in his opinions about what we should and should not be doing. So we did get in touch. Thankfully, our attorney, Nan Bess, who's just wonderful, we're on the phone the next day, and we basically said, look, this is all it's going to be. No one is going to try to do anything more with it. What can we do for you? Because we were waiting for a cease and desist because they said that Edward Albee owns all stage rights because of his failed production of Lolita on Broadway, which lasted a week or so.
A week or
yeah,
two?
back in the 1970s. So we did ultimately, and we said, look, and he said, how can you say no one's going to know about it? It was in the New York Times. And my response was, no one reads the New York Times anymore, so it's all right. And it was in
the
one
failing
day.
New York Times?
Huh?
Did you say the failing New York Times?
Yes, the failing New York Times. I said, exactly. I said, no one's going to read it. And, it was gone. It was gone one day. So they actually ended up being rather nice about it, thankfully. But it is interesting, though, that Lolita as a product, if you want to write an opera of Lolita,
There is one.
those rights you can write an opera. Alan J. Lerner's rights do not extend, Edward Albee's rights do not extend to it being to opera world. So if you wanted to take every word and make sure it was sung and call it an opera, you actually could arguably do that.
Well, there is one.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So you have to pay them.
And in Europe you could do it, but in the United States and Canada you cannot. So we finally did. So it was quite an adventure. But go ahead to the performances and then getting it up on his feet. So
because none of the material had ever, some of the material had never been done before. I did not know, for example, exactly how long the script was that I had put together. So I said to Jim, we need to have a table reading of this. And we did, and I timed it. And the timings were pretty good, actually. Now, that when you get it on its feet and you have applause and you have entrances and exits and, staging, that's going to balloon. You never know exactly by how much, but you know it's going to balloon. But I thought we were well within the ballooning, curve. At the Friday night dress rehearsal, Act 1 was 91 minutes. And Jim just comes up to me and he goes, "You are going to cut this, aren't you?"
In that way of mine.
At what, the 10 o'clock at night or whatever it was. And the first performance was the next afternoon at 2:30, And I was like, yes, we are, because that's too long. So I went home and I stayed up. My husband's here somewhere. He can probably say I was up most of that night. And I made cuts, marked them all, brought them in. They went into all the actors' scripts. No chance to rehearse them, but of course they did have the scripts, so they could see where they were. And we put it up in front of the first audience, and I'm sitting in the back going, should I shoot myself now or later? And the damn thing worked, and it came in at a reasonable time, for each act, and we survived.
More than survived. It was
a true success.
Yeah, and a scary process, but taking chances. I don't think we get credit for all the chances we take on things. That is one of the biggest.
Right.
But I think there are a lot of shows that we have given birth to that were equally scary for one reason or another.
Subways.
Right? Subways, yeah. Stuart did Subways Are for Sleeping, and we worked with Phyllis Newman, may she rest in peace, and we were also doing
Hallelujah, baby.
Hallelujah Baby. Oh yeah. So we were meeting with her at her apartment, her fabulous apartment on Central Park West, about subways, and she was very specific. It could not be done unless she was involved in writing it, and she met Stuart and liked him, or she knew you. But and so we finished our first meeting, and it ended very nicely. And something was said about, oh, now we have to have casting calls. And she said, for what? And I said, for Hallelujah Baby. And she said, what? And I said, for Hallelujah Baby. And she said, you can't do Hallelujah Baby unless, how do I not know about this? And I said, I don't know. We have the rights. We have the rights from MTI.
Yeah, right.
And she said, no way. And she said, I have to approve the casting. How did this happen? I said, I don't know. We have a signed contract. Well, it doesn't work in New York. But anyway, it ended up being fine. She met Stephanie Umo, who played the lead, and loved her. It all smoothed out. But that was another terrifying moment where she could have said, no, you're not doing it. And we'd already announced it. And we're in auditions for it.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about the Mufti series is people often think, oh, it's sweet, they do these nice little shows, without really understanding the whole, like I said, the onion layers behind, and the fact that these shows have fascinating stories and fascinating people that they've worked with. I mean, Pam, talk about some of your experiences with some of the shows that you've done and the Muftis.
Well, this is going to be a banal thing to say, but one of the interesting things with getting, sometimes when you have a show that hasn't been done and you get the music and you go, oh my God, you know, it's paste and glue and oh my God, I can't read it and all this. Somehow, Decline and Fall, though it's never been done in this town, I don't think, till we did it. Maybe it's been done once. Rodgers and Hammerstein, it's in their library.
Yes.
I have never seen more pristine music. Eric and I both sat there, huh? Because I've done things, other shows, you know, not particularly Muftis, whatever, and you get the sides and you get the books, and you go, I can't even read this. What is this? And they're, you know, the licensing companies getting all this. So that's always been the thing, is getting the music and getting everything in shape for people. I have a funny Josh Grizzetti story about he did the tomfoolery. I don't know if you remember that. He was in the Tom Lehrer piece.
Yes. Which is a review of Tom Lehrer's songs.
Yeah, it's funny show. And he this is the thing, you know, they don't get the material ahead of time, but if you want to, and Josh said, well, I'm really busy, but I said, well, you know, listen to some of it on, I don't know, it was on YouTube or something. Well, he got here, and one of the songs, I don't know if you've ever seen the review, it's that whole, the periodic element table. There's, you know, it's like a Gilbert and
It's to Modern Major General from Pirates of Penzance.
But it's a brilliant, it's a very funny song. So he looked and said, holy crap,
Yes.
what have I done? I could have listened to somebody doing it, but he ended up being very well. But that was, his life sort of momentarily flashed before him, and then he came back. So I think that's the thing that I found that's interesting, is just what the shape it's in, and I've had, you know, we've had sometimes actors that freak a little bit, usually not too bad.
I have another story that brought to mind. I saw Nancy Anderson last week in Charles Bush's play. Her first, I think her first appearance in New York. Joe McConnell, did you cast that?
Yes. She'd done some readings of some things, and she'd never really done much in New York City. She had been making a big splash. She did like 2 leads in a row at Goodspeed, and I'd seen her do some stuff. I knew she was very promising, and I actually, bless him, made Eric go out in the pouring rain to Goodspeed and take her scripts.
Joe is Eric's husband.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
And based upon doing Darling of the Day, then of course, then she went into Jolson Company for us.
Right. She was one of 3 people in Jolson and Company and it moved downtown and all that. Anyway, it was her beginning in New York City, and she said, if you know Girl Who Came to Supper, there's a song called The Coconut Girl, where it was Florence Henderson originally, and she doesn't sing a lot through, I guess, the first part of the show, and there's a point where it's based on the movie The Prince and the Showgirl, and the prince with whom she's in love or thinks anyway, there's a love interest. he says, so what is this play about that you're in? And she proceeds to sing the entire score for him from her character's perspective. And it's always in her musical part. So she's leaving out things because other people are singing, but it's telling the entire story. It's like a 15-minute number. And so she said, we got to Thursday, this was the old Mufti rehearsal week, and we got to Thursday, and I had done a couple of songs, and I said to Michael Montel, or I was just feeling, well, I guess I don't sing much in this, because we were going through it chronologically. And I turned the page at the end of Thursday, maybe, and saw this number, and I said, Michael, what is this? And he said, oh, that's your big showstopper. And she said, what is it? And he explained, oh, she recounts the whole story of the show that she's in to her boyfriend, the prince. And she said, and we go on to an audience tomorrow night. And she said, how am I going to learn this? And she said, this requires choreography. And he said, oh, it'll happen. And she went home and she worked it out on the piano and she choreographed it all herself. She came in the next morning and said, okay, Michael, this is what I've come up with. And she did it and he said, oh, that's perfect. See, I told you. And she was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant. But I'd never heard that story till last week. I thought we always did a run-through, a read-through of every show beforehand.
No, we never. No
No time for that.
No time, you have to start.
Jim,
Yes.
if I may, and Eric can recount, the problem with Girl Who Came to Supper is the fact that we had no score.
Yeah,
Eric,
this is one of the challenges frequently of putting together a Mufti. The Girl Who Came to Supper never was licensed to any licensing house.
That's right.
And I was actually at the Library of Congress in a very hot August, late in August, and the Girl Who Came to Supper, I looked it up, opened September 17th. And I'm there like the last week of August doing research for the John Latouche review that we did, Taking a Chance on Love. I was getting John Latouche material.
A full production.
Yeah,
Eric
it was a
wrote.
full production. And my husband calls me and says, well, you know, Barry Day promised us the script and score, but all we've got so far is the script. We haven't heard from him. We don't have the score because Joe was working on staff at that time. And he said, you're at the Library of Congress. Could you see if there's anything there? I said, okay. And I indeed found most of the songs to The Girl Who Came to Supper there. But just, you know, sheet music, not a piano vocal, not the way they were routined in the show or anything like that, just the sheet music for the songs, which had been submitted for copyright purposes. And so I copied all of that, sent it over here, you know, so they would at least have something to work from. And then apparently...
This is probably by fax, wasn't this
Maybe I faxed it, I don't remember how I did it. Oh, I think it was faxed, yes. But then only a day or two before rehearsals were supposed to begin, a box arrived in the mail, and it had the entire piano vocal score to The Girl Who Came to Supper except for the first page of the overture. And Barry Day had been frantically trying to find it, couldn't find it. He had called Coward's lover, Graham Payne, who was still living...
Barry Day is the head of the Coward
estate
in
he was
the
an
United
executive,
States.
yes. And he apparently Barry Day had been looking for it in other places and finally called Graham Payne in desperation. Do you know where this is? And Graham said, oh yes, it's in a closet upstairs.
in Switzerland.
In Switzerland, yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Charles,
Sometimes,
that's for the book.
yeah. You get copies of things sometimes. I've had this. I can't think particularly what particular shows, and they say, I can't read it. What is that? And then you're going, what is it on your, and maybe it's in the piano score better, and you're, you know, because there's not a copy. That's what was so amazing about this last show. It was beautifully.
Well, because a lot of it also, especially when you receive it, especially if it's a show of a certain period, it'll be handwritten. It will not be printed. It'll literally be the copyist's handwriting, which sometimes is very readable and oftentimes, more often than not, is not. And so especially when you're doing some of these shows, you really have to do as much archaeological work and background work in terms of trying to figure out what they're actually trying to say. One thing I want to ask you guys about, Jim and Charles in particular, are the shows that you did more than once and that have a history and why. You know, you might have brought them back. Carmelina being one of them, and those
Three times.
Three times.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Muftis, yeah.
And Darling of the Day twice. The Grass Harp twice. Well, Grass Harp 3 times because we did a full production of it first, and then twice in the Muftis. Maybe it's time to do it again. I don't know. It's what else? Seth? Oh, Ender Laughing,
Right.
of course. Ender Laughing. It's the king because 2 Muftis, 3 full productions
Right.
actually.
And Hallelujah, baby.
Hallelujah Baby twice. Yes.
But
yes.
2 different versions.
2 different versions. That's a very important thing. The second time we did it,
It was Arthur Lawrence's rewrite. He rewrote the show in, I think, 2004, and it had a production in New Jersey that also played at the Arena Stage in Washington. They had hoped to bring off Broadway. It had been announced it might go to the Little Schubert, but it never happened.
and he had wanted to re-look at
He
it.
had wanted to rewrite it. The show had been written for Lena Horne, and she decided she didn't want to do it. And they ended up with, they discovered basically, well, this is Leslie Uggams' Broadway debut. She was known from TV, but, you know. Leslie Uggams was much younger than Ms. Horne and much softer in her persona. And so in order to accommodate that, Arthur rewrote the book for Leslie Uggams and felt that he had taken too much of the sting out of the material. And he wanted to restore the show to what he felt was, you know, the biting look at race relations in America that he'd always wanted it to be. And that's what he did for the 2004 version. He rewrote it, either in some cases put back stuff, otherwise, you know, wrote new stuff to be more in line with what he thought the show should have been.
Betty Condon said to me, we did a lot of shows with Betty Nadoff early on in the series, and they were around, they were rewriting. That's a point to make that the people on 55th Street feel free to rewrite books for shows to make them shorter or more palatable for audiences today. We pride ourselves on not doing that unless the authors are alive, because we just like trying to recreate what was done originally with whatever flaws there may be. If the author's around, like Joe was during Enter Laughing, and can say,
Phyllis.
no, we
And
all,
Phyllis.
and Phyllis very much on subways.
And
Can Larry Grossman, yeah, we've worked with a lot of writers.
We had all 3 on Baker Street, didn't we? Marilyn Gurdjieff and Jerry Cooper Smith, and I can't remember the composer.
Raymond Jessel.
Raymond Jessel.
That's
they were
right.
all there, and
That's
they were thrilled that
exactly
we were
right.
actually bringing it back. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. They actually are delighted, aren't they, that we are actually working
They-
on their material.
Yes, it gives them a chance to revisit things.
Yeah.
What's his name? Who wrote Kelly?
Eddie Lawrence.
Eddie Lawrence was around, told these sad stories about what happened on Kelly. And he was banned from the theater, and he said, "You have no idea what this means to me to see that." He said, "I have all the orchestrations piled up in my garage, and just to see it on stage again. No, it's not perfect, and this is probably the only time it'll ever be done again. But he was so grateful." What's his name? Who wrote First Roman?
Irvin Drake.
Irvin Drake, wonderful writer, was very pleased that we did that. Anyway, blah blah
Well, and
blah.
we had the entire big creative team.
Oh, that's
Yes.
Like
Yes.
working on the show.
Well, I mean, that, and
Not
I
only
think- but I
working
think-
on the show, but in the cast.
And
in
who
the
was the
cast,
creative
yes.
team?
Richard Maltby, David Shire, and John Weidman.
Yes.
And then last minute we had an actor illness completely unexpectedly, and Richard Maltby took over the role of the toy magnate and was brilliant.
Well, I think that's the other thing to point out is that the Muftis are not just old chestnuts, meaning with much affection, but you've also done a great job over the years of making sure that there are younger composers whose songs, like Ahrens and Flaherty being a good one, Maltby and Shire being that they are represented as well because of material that they're interested in seeing that perhaps is not seen. I mean, My Favorite Year being another one that you all did.
Yes, yeah, and we did a short run of that. We'd love to do it again if we can get that cast together. There was some point I was leading up to, and I forgot it completely. But anyway, let's move on.
So, well, you know, I'd love to open it up to audience, but before we do, I'd love to just go down, because you all are Mufti-ites and experts. What was either the show that got away that you've always wanted to do here, or the one that really stood out and said, oh yes, this was it. This was something I never thought I'd get to do, and I'm thrilled that I got it to do it, or I never thought I would be doing.
Well, can we add one other thing
Yeah,
in
of
there?
course. Yes.
So your favorite show that you did, and the one you wish you could do, but also the one that someone else did. Well, I guess I'm confusing it.
Well,
Stay with the original question, and I'll shut up.
What is it again?
Well, Big was a show that I actually saw in previews in Detroit, out of town, when that was. And so getting a chance to do that show in New York with the original team looking over our shoulder and giving us notes, and, you know, we restored some songs that had been taken out because they did a lot of rewrites for the tour, so they kind of rewrote the rewrites when they were here. So that was getting to do that, just, you know, sort of, I have a memory of having a conversation at one point where John Weidman, Richard Mubby, and David Shire were all standing on those 3 stairs looking at me, and I'm like, whoa, if my 20-year-old college self could see this. So that was great, and I have a list of things. Rachel Lee Rosenblum is one that I've always thought would be
Explain what that is.
Yes, please.
that was by Paul
The actual
Jabbar.
title is.
The actual title is Rachel Lily Rosenblum, and Don't You Ever Forget It. Rachel spelled Rachael because she added the A that Barbara Streisand dropped from her name. It was a vehicle for Ellen Green that Paul Jabara, who was in the cast of Hair, and then later on wrote Last Dance and
King
a bunch
Herod,
of other
too.
disco. What's that?
Isn't he King Herod in
And he was King Herod in the London
Jesus Christ
Superstar. And he wrote this crazy, ridiculous show about this Zoftig girl from Brooklyn who becomes a Hollywood gossip columnist. And it's ridiculous and crazy and hasn't been done. They did a concert, they did the songs in 54 Below. But
And there was a number from it in our
And we did a
in
number,
our
yeah,
OH award
when we did
last
the Andre
fall.
DeShields benefit, because Andre had been in the
Yeah.
show, we did one of his songs from that. So
Yeah.
I think that should lead into a full production. That or Via Galactica is the other thing.
And what was Via Galactica?
That was by Galt McDermott, who wrote Hair. It was a through-song musical that took place in space and was staged on trampolines.
It opened the Eurus.
It opened the Eurus, yes.
The Eurus Theater. Yeah.
Never recorded, hasn't been
And
done.
directed by Sir Peter Hall,
Yes.
of all people.
Yes, yes. Eric?
Well, both of the shows that I did, Darling of the Day and Lolita My Love, meant a very, very great deal to me. But the one that was the most, I guess, was Lolita My Love. I had been fascinated with that show since it was announced for Broadway in the spring of 1970 when I was a senior in high school. And when it folded out of town, I was devastated. I mean, Alan J. Lerner is the reason that I became a writer. His work. I saw Camelot, the national tour of Camelot, when I was 8 years old at the Hannah Theater in Cleveland, Ohio, and left. Decided I said I want to do that for my career. I wasn't quite sure what that was, but I knew I had to do that in some way. And I was always passionate about the score to Lolita. I recognized that what scripts I had been able to find, and I had not been able to find anything really but the Boston version, which was the final, was the second out-of-town city. It did not work. I knew that. But the score was so good, and there was such good writing in individual scenes that I felt, this was a show that I was really passionate about. It also led me to read the novel when I was a senior in high school, and the novel kind of blew my mind as to what novels could accomplish. And so to see the show take shape, to play well, to have audiences respond to it favorably, to see it pack a real emotional punch, was very, very deeply satisfying to me, because it had become, if anybody knew it at all, it had become a joke. oh, they made a musical of Lolita, My Love. Ha 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 ha. What idiots, you know.
Eric, to remind people, it closed out of town. It never came.
Yes,
to
it
New
closed
York.
out of town,
So
yes.
the New York production was actually
Was the New York premiere, yes, yeah. And we made, we had audiences take it seriously. The critics were generally fairly favorable, you know, to the production. And I felt that it vindicated Alan J. Lerner in particular and John Barry, that they made a very serious attempt to adapt a classic dark novel with taste and intelligence, and succeeded more than they failed, in my opinion. And that mattered a great deal to me. As for a title, Lolita, My Love was always the holy grail. I wouldn't mind seeing 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is a show that I reconstructed and directed back in 1992 at the University of Indiana at the request of the Bernstein Estate. But the Bernstein Estate will not allow 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to be done ever again, so I think that's unlikely. If I have to pick another title, it would probably be The Vamp, which is a satire of the silent movies by John Latouche, and
which starred.
Oh, it starred Carol Channing, and it was not a success. It was actually a success on the road. It got great reviews on the road, but it really bombed when it came into New York City. Richard Maltby saw it out of town and told me he thought it was one of the most fascinating flops he'd ever seen, and that there were things in it that he learned from seeing The Vamp that he uses to this day. It has a wonderful score by Latouche and James Mundy. The book is by Latouche, and I'm blanking on his Sam Locke. And the book is, like in most cases, the book is the problem. I don't know if it would hold the stage or not, because it was very reliant, or appears to have been very reliant upon movement and choreography and production numbers. But I would really love to find a way to get it into the series if I felt it was in a playable form, just so people could hear the score, because it was never recorded. Nobody knows. We had several of the songs in the John Latouche review, Taking a Chance on Love. And they're wonderful songs. But it's really a completely unknown score by a top Broadway lyricist. Sam Mundy is the only score he ever wrote, but the music's very good. And he was a very well-known jazz trombonist, I believe. So anyway, that would probably be the next
I should interject, as Joe has been interjecting. Joe McConnell, I didn't fill out the biography. He was on our staff for a couple of years.
Year and a half.
What?
Year and a half.
Year and a half as both our casting director and our development director, which is a unique thing. He did a beautiful job. Several of the casts, one was for the Muftis was 70 Girls 70.
Oh, which was wonderful with Jane Powell and Helen Gallagher and Jane Cannell.
And George Irving.
George Irving.
George Irving, Charlotte Ray. It was quite a group.
Yes, yeah.
We got national media coverage for that.
Yes, yes. Anyway,
Eric, forgive me, but tell the story to answer Evan's question about rides. Tell briefly about Little Prince.
Oh no,
oh,
I
let's
don't
not
want
get
to
into
talk
that.
about
Let's not get into
No, we'd
that.
rather not talk about it.
Another time.
Yeah.
That's a whole evening.
Yes. Briefly, Darling of the Day was my favourite. I must say I did enjoy it, and by the second time I really knew what we were doing. It was great fun. But I'd like to see...
Would you tell what... Oh, we have.
We have done that. But I'd like to see Baker Street done again, actually, because what we proved here was that it could work without sinking under the enormous weight of an over-financed Broadway production. When Alex Cohen produced it, he even staged, and it's not even in the script, Queen Victoria's funeral with puppets. It was completely unnecessary. The story worked perfectly well here, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
And there are some really good songs in it. And sadly, I think people still associate it with the mega musical, and it really doesn't have to be. It could be done as a chamber And I think
Question
that's
is-
what Muftis so often prove.
The question is whether you do it with or without the Sheldon Harnick songs that are on the recording. But we didn't do them.
We didn't, did we?
because all the original writers were still alive and
Ah.
didn't want them. But several of the wonderful songs, Letters, are Sheldon's songs.
Oh,
But anyway,
that's
I-
me.
Pam?
Oh, I think Berlin to Broadway, the Kurt Weill. I really love doing that. That music is so amazing.
Berlin to Broadway.
speak up.
Berlin to Broadway with Kurt Weill.
Mm.
That was just a joy from the beginning because you have everything. You have, it starts with all the German and then, it ends up with the American things. I think they're doing something across town. Aren't they doing Love? What are they doing?
Love
now?
Life.
Love Life, yeah.
We had some song. That was just an amazing thing. But I also wanted to say about the Cole Porter we just did, that what was so, exciting to me was it wasn't the ones you hear, the tunes you hear all the time, though I've been a devotee of Bobby Short and have heard these songs. But like some people like Lauren, these wonderful performers, they didn't know these songs, they're not familiar with them. And I said, you should do this for an audition. I said, if you came in and did, she said, yeah, I just, so it's entered, and you find that too. People, they go, what are these? I said, there's this wonderful music, this Cole Porter music that I don't think that's why I also like to do some of the reviews. I want to hear this music. As far as a show I'd love to do, I don't know if they ever do Grover's Corners. Do they do that as a show?
They're not allowed to.
They're not allowed to. Too bad.
The rights. There's a story
that
there.
was one of the most amazing things that was in the review that, I just thought it had beautiful.
Grover's Corners was a musical version of Our Town by Tom Jones and Harvey Schmidt, who wrote The Fantastics.
It's just
And
beautiful.
they lost the rights to it. The nephew of Thornton Wilder, who wrote the original play, decided he didn't like their version of it. And he also killed a musical version of The Skin of Our Teeth by John Kander and Fred Ed and Joe Stein.
Right.
And so this is the man who's, I'm assuming, making hundreds of thousands of dollars yearly from Hello Dolly, which he probably never would have allowed. But he doesn't like musical theater. He likes operas. So he allowed an opera of Our Town
Skin
and
of Our Teeth.
an opera of Skin of Our Teeth.
Yeah, it just made
But
me-
don't get me started.
It's beautiful stuff.
Charles?
My sentimental favorite is Baker Street. It was my the first Broadway play I ever saw, and at that age, it was the summer of the World's Fair in 1965, and Alex Cohen had produced this, as you say, for tourists. But it transported me to an astral plane. And when the Muftis did Baker Street, I was so delighted to find that it actually was a very good piece. And the thing that I'd like to see done is the musical Ambassador, the musical version of Henry James' novel, The Ambassadors. Hackaday. I don't know it, so I don't know whether it would work. But the idea of a massive late career novel by Henry James on the musical stage is fascinating.
It's on the list. It has been for a number of years, and it will happen, God willing, and the creeks don't rise.
Oh, me. I loved everyone. I mean, I guess I have to say in laughing, of course, because it's just a joy, and it used every piston was firing. And but I did love the work we did on Minnie's Boys, and would love to. We have done much more since, because we really got to do the stuff that they couldn't do on Broadway that they had, and then we added more songs. I loved the Silk Stockings. That was quite something that should have a life. But I would love to do Roberta, because nobody does Kern.
That's right.
And I was going to talk to you. William Ivy Long and I were talking. We've got to do this.
But we don't do costumes in the Muftis.
No, but we do draping.
Okay.
No, but we're.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, Roberta, and my favorite of all was Little Mary Sunshine and Divorce Me, Darling, which is a sequel to The Boyfriend that they've never done. It's never been done here.
Little Mary Sunshine, I put my oar in for that.
Yeah,
I was
Little
wondering,
Mary
never
Sunshine,
have. I've
because
come
it's never
close.
been done. Hasn't been done.
No, it's good.
I think it's too big for us to do.
Well,
The
you
cast
double.
songs, but
You're telling they're Native Americans.
and yeah, and
It's
is
got-
that uncomfortable?
No.
I love Little Mary
Well,
Sunshine,
It's
but
wonderful. Nobody ever touches it.
I know.
It should be touched.
I designed it at Woodstock Playhouse in 1977.
God.
It's so funny.
So
I
I
was
was
James,
in high
funny.
school. I was a
It's
forest
James,
ranger.
what about you?
Well,
I know they're all your children.
I'm loath to say which one is my favorite. Whenever people ask me to name my 10 favorite musicals, and there was a book that asked me that, and I refused to go in print because I know too many people, not that my opinion means anything, but just to say to someone, well, you're not on my top 10 list. That's awkward.
Well, what's
So,
the sh- what,
but-
let me turn the question
But
to you then.
I'll answer.
Okay.
One that unexpectedly became a gigantic favorite of mine was "Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope,"
Yeah.
and part of it was getting to know Mickey Grant, who mercifully is still with us and is just amazing. And a week or so before we did it, I was in Florida listening to the recording in a rental car, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I don't know if this is going to work. It just seemed like I wasn't sure how much was there. And
Well, explain
but
to Mickey Grant. Explain to
Mickey Grant is, I don't know what age she is, but she was the first woman of any race to write book music and lyrics for a Broadway musical. She happens to be African American. It ran on Broadway in 1972 and ran for 2 years, I think. And
First woman Tony nomination.
she got a Tony nomination for book.
First
Someone referred to it as a review.
First
She said, it's not a
African-American
review. I
first.
got a Tony nomination for the book. And she was up against A Little Night Music for the book, which opened, they had been running for, 6 months, and then A Little Night Music opened 2 weeks before the Tony Awards, and they won. And Little Night Music's a fabulous show, and I love it very much. But anyway, just that whole experience. Encores did it a few years later. They did it a few years later. Another of my favorite experiences was number 100 in the Mufti series, which is Saturday Night by Stephen Sondheim. It was his first show. We have done, I think, more shows of his than any other theater in town. We don't do them as much anymore because our emphasis is more on new works. But this was a perfect thing to celebrate the 100th Mufti. And we had just changed to the new schedule in the Muftis, and he let it be known that he could only come to the dress rehearsal. So on a Mufti schedule, the dress rehearsal is when it is the least together ever. And we all thought, oh, great, that's the only time he can come. He said, no, that's the only time I can come. So he came. He was extremely pleased with it. And so much so that he came again the following week to see it again. He said, this is the way this show should be done. It's a young writer finding his way, not really knowing what he's writing. And it should not be a full production. It should be a simple production like this where you can really get into the material. And you've cast it so beautifully. He just went on in a wonderful way that it sort of justifies everything we do in the Mufti series. Those are 2 wonderful experiences. But there have been so many. I'm not saying those are
No, of
my
course.
favorite. Those are 2 that just
They're all
left
your
out at me.
So before we close, do we have any prescient questions that anybody wants to ask of anybody up here? Yes.
Oh, this is David McCoy, the chairman of our board. From the beginning, wonderful supporter. We would not be here without David McCoy.
Yeah, David.
Jim, in your intro, you didn't define the word Mufti.
Yes, he did.
No, it's true. You did
That's
not
right,
actually,
I did.
you
Yeah, Evans asked me to, I completely forgot. Thank you, David. Mufti means in street clothes without all the trappings of a full production. It's actually an East Indian word that was picked up by the British Army. Someone's going to set this to music sometime. It can be sung or played over the intercom. was actually an East Indian word, Mufti, that was picked up by the British Army to mean in civilian clothes or out of uniform, and we use it to mean in street clothes or the clothes brought from home. And it's amazing what is in actors' closets. There have been shows that have been so beautifully put together because the director has an idea. I want all of Act One in blue, or I want you all to, and he'll show pictures. He or she will show pictures. But anyway, it's amazing. Shows have come together, and people say, "Wait a minute! The actors brought those clothes from home. It looks like it was perfectly costumed by a designer." So that's what Mufti means. Thank you, Dave.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I have a couple questions. I'm just gonna, you may choose not to answer them. Is there anything that you did that you wish you hadn't? Is there a musical that you would like to do that perhaps you're precluded from doing, or you just think is unworthy? I'm thinking there is the Tiffany's off the top of my head. Secondly, I saw 2 shows recently, Mufti-esque, but not quite there, and they were, I went with high hopes and expectations. They were dreadful. And I kept thinking, Jim could have done it so well. So what is your secret sauce that makes every one of your shows just come alive? And
It's,
something that Mufti
I don't know what the secret sauce is. It's finding the right people to work with to bring them to life, and generally staying out of their way. Directors will tell you that I don't sit in on every rehearsal and say, "Don't do that, don't do that." I leave them alone. There have been times I wish I hadn't, but that's generally my style, is let them go and do their work. They know what they're doing, or we wouldn't have hired them. And they have put together a great cast, which we have a say. We have a say in. So you trust the people you've hired and let them have at it. If you believe in the material, and they believe in the material and understand it. There have been a couple of times I thought, well, so-and-so didn't understand the material. That's the problem. I wish I'd explained it better, or explained what I see in it. Maybe I don't understand it, and I saw something there that wasn't really there. So that's that. What were the other questions?
What show basically got away that you wish you could do but might have been precluded from?
Well, I don't know if I... Seth, can you... Seth is our literary manager and knows more about musical theater than God. Is there something we...
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. There have been things that we did that then encores did, and sometimes we did them better.
That's great. Because,
I
and don't bother me, I can't come.
Yeah, because I'm not often in on the legal section, so I don't know.
Well, I would love to do Grover's Corners. And if there's ever a way to...
It would be great to do over and over. The Skin of Our Teeth.
Oh,
All
is
that
that...
up, whatever the title is.
I think it ended up being people like us. Was,
Well, Jim,
yeah.
Not people like us.
if I can throw one out, we're actually doing it this year, and you've worked very hard to get it, which is Blue Roses.
Oh, well, yeah, but it's a new show. It's the musical of the Glass Menagerie. It's being done April 6th. It's by Nancy Ford and Mimi Turk. We've helped develop it. It's a new piece over the past 8 years, and it's one like Lolita. It sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit, but it's a beautiful piece. And Austin Pendleton came on board as the director about 4 years ago, and really made it into something amazing. It was always good, but he upped it several notches, and we have a stunning cast. I hope you all come. Thank you for bringing that up. I hope you will all come April 6th. It's that date, somewhere right around the actual 75th anniversary of the opening of the Glass Menagerie on Broadway. It's a gorgeous piece of musical theater that deserves to be seen. The trick there is the Tennessee Williams estate understanding who we are and thinking that we're going to take it immediately to Broadway, and they're worried that it will eclipse the play. Well, duh, it's not going to happen. It's not that kind of show. It's a beautiful jewel of a piece, and I hope you will all come see
With
it.
an amazing cast, Anita Gillette and Howard McGillan and Piper Goodeve and
Jeff Creedy.
So it's a great group of people that you'll want to see bring the show to life. And again, thankfully it's a show that, as you've been going back and forth over the rights over the years, has, finally being able to do it is very exciting.
Yeah. And you had a third question.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet.
Okay.
I was wondering what the audience reaction is. What do people say to you, not necessarily when they're walking out, because, it was wonderful, but what are they saying when they really reach out to you? Is this all new business to them? Is this like finding that vein of gold that they knew was there that they never?
The wonderful.
Now I'll shut up. What are you looking forward to in the next 50 years for Muftis? Bam.
I can't go there. I mean, there is a list in my office actually of shows people have suggested, I have thought of, and it's always having them fall into place at the right time with the right director, and sometimes it's creating a series that ties it all together. But there are a number now, like Ambassador, that I have to find a way to do because the writers didn't write anything else, unless there's a.
Hal wrote a bunch of other shows.
Oh, that's true.
But we've done them all.
Well, we've done most of them. Yeah, Hal Hackety. But anyway, what was it? There was another question.
What is the?
Oh, what do people say? What's wonderful is when you find someone who's connected passionately to what we're doing the way I do, and say, I never thought I would get a chance to see this show again. I saw it when I was 6 or something, and it brings back even this simple production. You've handled it so well. It means so much. Then there was the woman. People say, why do you go through that speech at the beginning of every show, telling what the process is and why they're on book and all that? And I said, because people don't understand it, and people who are here for the first time really are confused. So we're doing Dear World with Tyne Daly, which was another one that was just a wonderful experience. Michael Montel directed it, and went through the speech, how it's done, how many hours of rehearsal, that's why they're on book, blah, blah, blah. And this woman at intermission said, well, I'm leaving. If they can't even bother to learn the lines, I'm not going to stay. So, that's why I do the speeching. So. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My question illustrated with this quote from Private Lives when Amanda says to Elliot, I've been brought to believe that it's beyond the pale for a man to strike a woman. And his retort is a very poor tradition. Certain women should be struck regularly, like gongs. Now, I think it would be criminal to take that out in any. When you have the equivalent thing in musicals that you feel obliged with this wretched political correctness we have nowadays to change things, or do you just sort of fight for what the author did originally?
Well, it's very hard. And for a long time, I would say, no, you keep it in. That was in the original. Today, it's a little more difficult.
The song Enter Laughing.
Enter Laughing, we had a lot of that, and I had to judge whether the audience is going to think about it or are they going to enjoy the show. Is it going to make them think about where this is? Then I would take it out. If it was just part of the period and everything, but if it struck me that it was going to make anybody uncomfortable, it was out, and I don't care who knows it, because it was about, entertainment, and some of the stuff just needed to be.
But you and Joe did that together the first time.
The first
and
time
you had
we
to
had
make
done it, and the
decisions
second
about-
time we did it, and people got a little upset, and we had some rights issues. I mean, not rights, but the Stan Daniels' wife was very upset with having
Stan
to
Daniels
change
wrote the songs.
the songs. Yeah, and I understood her point of view, and we tried very hard, but we couldn't leave the song in the way it was and make everybody comfortable. So we just finessed it and we massaged it as
Well,
best we
use the
could.
example because it was so easily and so lightly done that it worked beautifully.
Undressing, each time I see a girl walking down the street, I start undressing her with my eyes. Was making a lot of people uncomfortable in the room, and some
Isn't
people.
that awfully silly?
No,
Quite
well, I'm not going to debate.
No.
Yeah.
So, and it made them uncomfortable, and they were part of the team. And we changed it to Romancing Girls with my eyes, and it worked.
So everything's dumbed down.
No, it wasn't
No, not
dumbed down.
everything.
I'm
but-
not saying that, but I mean, that seems to be the whole thing that's in the
No.
air now.
No,
No,
keep 'em
no,
out.
No, I think it's just a matter of you live in the times in which you live and you
We see
create
your
art.
point,
We see
and
your point completely.
we in the theater community understand the idea of being true to the original intent of the writer. But the other question, would that writer, if he were alive, he or she were alive today, would they keep it in? Would they not be able to say, yeah, I see why it makes some people uncomfortable. Here are some alternatives.
I got to keep in, he's screwing Dolores Del Rio.
Well, then,
But if I hadn't done the first act changes, I think it might have been a bigger issue.
There were people who saying you really can't do that show again because of that song.
And we changed the intro into the song, made it the girls'
Exactly.
fantasy too.
Molly?
Mine is not a question, it's a comment. The reason that I and my friends will never miss a Mufti is because it is clear, especially the talkbacks, that what you cast, you're using their ideas too. You're allowing them to be able to help make what this is.
Thank you.
And then the other thing I love is there are no props. There are no things. You know, busy stage. So those of us watching it can create our own set and create, you know, we can make all sorts of things happen up there. And so we feel like we are participating when we come to a Mufti.
Well, and on that note, I can't think of a better way of ending, but saying to all of you, we hope that you'll keep on coming to the Muftis. And more importantly, if you have somebody who's never been to who's never been to New York, that's just a sin. But if they've never been to a Mufti or whatever, then bring somebody who's never been here before. Because,
Wait, before we say goodbye, I would love to just hear as many people who want to say their favorite Mufti that they remember. And we can do this very quickly. Would you raise your hand? Yes.
Subways.
Great.
Ah,
Anyone? Yes. Wait.
Interlocking.
Wait. Saturday night. Yeah. Enter laughing.
huh,
I see a
Big-
consensus.
yeah.
2x2 and the whole Richard Rogers series in 2002.
I love it. It was amazing.
Jim, this one.
Oh, yes.
There was nothing there.
My favorite year. Great. Anyone?
My favorite.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Great.
Yeah.
Carnival was a full production. It won all sorts of awards. It was our first show in this
Directed
space.
by Pam.
Pam directed it.
First show here.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. We should do that as a Mufti.
Yes.
We can possibly.
Oh, yeah.
You could, that's.
Thrilled me. That was a full production, but
was
it
a
was
full
very
pro-
simple.
thank you.
I can
Thank
see
you.
how you could.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I was very proud.
Well,
okay.
So, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.